Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Cymbal series. Today we are talking about stacks, stacks, and more stacks. Stacking cymbals is not a new thing. It's been going on for ages. Lots of people are doing it in contemporary music. And what we want to go through today is some staccato sounds, some less staccato sounds, and maybe some options for cymbals that you already own that can kind of get turned into a new sound for you where you may have been sick of them or have just been kind of gathering dust. We ourselves are getting some cymbals out of mothballs today for these concepts that we're going over, and we have 4 that we love to use around here that behave really differently, not only under the stick, but in terms of the sound, and again, also in terms of the sustain, which is a really fundamental part of stacking that we want to dive into extra here, because I feel like it's not talked about enough, and it really influences the way we can use these things. Starting on my right, your left, we have what generally I think of as the normal stack, which is a china on top of a traditional cymbal. This can be 10 inches, it can be huge like this, a 16 over an 18. This is a thing I've seen Dave Weckl do, we've seen Bozio do things like this, there's little Mac stacks now, there's a whole plethora of stuff. But what it boils down to is we only have the contact of the edge of the bow on the china touching the cymbal beneath. So it's not a lot of actual surface area contact, which means bright attack, means maybe a little more sustain if we don't cinch it down. Let's feel it out, see what it sounds like. The cool thing about this is it's not that far from a china cymbal. It's like a gated china cymbal a little bit, and depending on how tightly you cinch it down, you can really get a lot of different sorts of behaviors between the two of them. Additionally, you don't have to buy this. Like we have an 18-inch K-Custom Dart Crash, we have a 16-inch Oriental China Trash on top. These are cymbals that were already here. This isn't like a thing that we sought out. We just put things together till we liked it, and there it is. Again, that's probably the funnest part of stacking, is you can really horse around and try things out, and when you find something you love, just pick a mental note and then use it later. The last thing I'll say about this large stack to my right is that with larger ones like this and options for tensioning with the felts, you can use them as alternate ride kind of pattern situations and not just a crash or an accent. You can also do this with a traditional splash on top of a crash cymbal, provided that the bells will clear, as we talked about earlier with profiles and all of that. You can get into more of a sort of X-hat or maybe a sizzly kind of sound, which can be super duper fun. Door number 2 is sort of a stack, but also sort of a auxiliary hi-hat in that we are using an X-hat stand for it. Now, the reason we're doing this is because we want to nest 2 cymbals together where the bells are far enough apart that we really couldn't get them on a cymbal stand and then get the wing nut on. And secondarily, utilizing a clutch like this, we have a lot more control over how much pressure is between them, which becomes the sustain basically like a traditional hi-hat. This here is a 8-inch splash Avidus inside of a 14-inch K Mini china. This is closer, getting into something closer to maybe like the sound of 2 cymbals together rather than just a short china. Here we go. Now with this setup, it's totally possible for us to completely choke this out and have no interaction between the cymbals at all. So if you're going to do an X-hat sort of setup for any of these things, the tension between the two, the pressure from the top and the bottom is really going to define the sound. And basically around here, we think that start with less and move toward more rather than backing off from maximum tension, because you'll discover that there's more options when they're loose that you might actually like that you wouldn't necessarily realize. With this rig, you do also have the option of playing on the splash cymbal, and depending on the tension, you can have more of a hi-hat sound in the center and then more of a China sound at the edge. With all of these, really, every surface and every sort of piece of real estate on there does its own thing, which, much like a ride cymbal or any other piece of equipment that we're using, is worth exploring, understanding. Try a different splash cymbal, try different tensions, lots of possibilities in each one. Number 3 is actually the one that I use the most. In this case, it's actually inverted from what I often do, but because of the sizes we're using, it really gets the best sound this way. And that is a China set inside of a splash cymbal, where they're basically both right side up, if we consider a China to be right side up when the bow is kicked up, like an old school sort of swish cymbal, or the way you'd see it in the early 20th century. This particular stack is a 10-inch Oriental China trash over an 11-inch K custom hybrid splash. So we have a little bit of extra splash around the edge. You can sort of choose your own adventure with these things if you want to do the exact same diameters. None of these stacks are the exact same diameter. Just goes to show you that that's not mandatory. You can really try things out and see what you like. Mini Chinas are a thing that I never really thought about a whole lot until I started experimenting with stacks, because I just didn't really see that in the music that I was making very much. But all of a sudden, with situations like this where I had a leftover splash cymbal that I didn't use anymore from my Stuart Copeland phase or whatever, it gives it a whole new life. And especially with little cymbals like this, it's also not an enormous investment compared to a new ride cymbal or a new snare drum. And every cymbal that we set it inside of is going to give us a whole different kind of world of sounds, which it makes it super versatile. But at the end of the day, if you're starting out with splashes and Chinas and just making things like that, a little pair like this will give you a lot of options, a lot of possibilities. Again, the tension changes everything. It's a whole world of stuff to explore. Also, for any of you out there that have bought stack packs where they were intentionally sold together and there's a photo on the front of how they're supposed to be mounted, that's a perfect opportunity to try things like we're doing here and discover that even though the box says do one thing, you can really do whatever you want. Last but certainly not least, the stack that we actually do the most here for the show, just because we love it so much, is actually putting a splash cymbal in the clutch with the top hi-hat cymbal. Again, everything we've said before applies. How tightly they are in the clutch changes how it sounds, your choice of cymbals, making sure that they marry around the edge so that you get good contact and get them to behave. This is one of the funnest sort of electronic, instamatic changes that we've found for any of the stuff that we do with cymbals here. This setup here, which is a 10-inch A-Custom EFX splash on top and our 15-inch Fat Hat prototypes underneath, is what is traditionally called a piggyback setup, which again, we could say about this one too, it's just two cymbals sitting on top of each other on the same sort of line. And with this particular situation, we get our traditional hi-hat behavior. It does all the things that a hi-hat does, albeit a little bit drier. But now we have some white noise in the top, whether it's closed or open or with the foot, and we also have a second surface to hit, which elicits a really different sound from the edge and basically gives us just a whole new set of sounds out of the hi-hat without actually changing out our hi-hats. This is a little bit more invasive of a thing to do because you do have to kind of take everything out of the clutch, and like it's not something you might change between songs on a gig. But on the other hand, it also doesn't change things so much that you couldn't do a lot of different sorts of gig, a lot of different styles with this sort of setup, while also getting away from the very traditional sound of a hi-hat and into something that's a little harder to peg for the artist and the audience and give yourself some new inspiration. On the other hand, hi-hat clutches are not particularly expensive. It's usually good to have an extra one. And if you wanted to, you could have a secondary hi-hat top with this kind of setup just to the side, pull this one off, put the other one on, and mix things up that way. Totally practical. There are some risks involved with mounting cymbals this way, maybe cinching them down super tight, pressing them together, using China cymbals in this position, which includes going through your sticks a whole lot faster because you're hitting an edge onto the wood, and also possibly cracking the cymbals because we are hitting them pretty hard, but they're not free to move, especially if we're cinching them down really tight for a super short sound. If this is a concern, you can always make sure that you're giving them enough sort of looseness in the felts to where they can move, and also make sure that if you're mounting things like this, that you're not swinging for the fences and really just trying to see if you can break them. Another thing that we do have to keep in mind with all of the stacking situations that we're doing here is the profile, the actual literal profile of the cymbals that we're matching together. The one on top needs to be able to clear the bell when you set it on top of the bottom one. So if you're dealing with a flatter cymbal on top, you may not actually be able to get edge contact all the way around, and you're going to end up not getting so much a stacky sound as just two cymbals that have been laid on the stand together but aren't actually touching kind of sound, which is really not very musical. In addition to the overall profile, the two bell shapes of the two cymbals that you're trying to nest together is also going to influence this. You can't really have a shallow, short bell on top of a big bell because, again, the cymbals are not actually going to meet in that manner. There's some other ways that we can utilize situations like that, but if we're talking about a simple just nested on top of each other stack situation, we have to make sure that the heights meet in such a way that we're getting edge contact so that we can get that attack and that little bit of sizzle if we're going for a longer sort of sustain. With all of these sounds combined, we have modified hi-hat, we have short, medium, long, sustain, very kind of clappy, a little bit more of an X-hat, open kind of sound, very sort of China, very kind of trashy and abrupt, but still with some sustain. But all of these are traditional cymbals, all of these are ordinary cymbals. There's nothing particularly special or weird or unusual about any of these, except that we found pairs that make a cool sound, that get us excited, that inspire us to play stuff that we wouldn't normally play. At the end of the day, this is another way to use things that maybe we already have lying around and give them a new life, or something that we can experiment with, checking out new things without really breaking the bank, trying out a little here, a little bit there, and get inspired to make new music. That about wraps it up. Thanks for coming along with us on this cymbal series today, all about stacks. I definitely learned a lot. A couple of these were things that I had never tried before and got me super excited about it. We would very much love to know your stacking preferences. I have also noticed that judicious use of tape and other things really affect stacks as well. If you have any modifications or any size preferences that really do the thing for you, would love to know about them, and also what you use them for, stylistically, or if it's just for your own music, whatever it might be. This is relatively new territory for me. It's not something I do all the time, and we would really love to know what you do with it.